Hi, I'm George Nordhaus, and today's Monday morning is one of three. This is a very unusual thing we're doing here today, but it's really going to be very, very important to you. We're going to be talking about planning your digital presence in 2014 and of course, thereafter. I heard these three people here make a presentation at the New Mexico Association's Big Eyes convention. It was fabulous. They're all excellent speakers, and they had this thing so well coordinated that I couldn't believe it. Marty Agather there on the left, he's the chief strategy officer, for the well, he has a split personality. He was an insurance agent. He was an IT specialist. He's a CPCU and an ARM. I mean, what all else could you have? He changed careers, and then he became a senior manager at Applied Systems and then other technologies organizations. Now he's VP of Sales for Project Cap at Minneapolis. And you'll hear more about that, of course, in Project Cap as life goes on here. Marit Peters is really an unusual person. She's the Chief Strategy Officer for the New Mexico Big Eye. But for 15 years, she's been leading teams, developing, implementing strategic business plans. She's promoted positive changes, productivity, market positions. This last year, she's really been working on digital marketing planning, specifically ways for agents to realistically tackle this overwhelming abyss of social media solutions. And that's daunting and complex. I'm the first to admit that, and we kind of do that for a living. So she's quite an interesting person, and you'll hear her and a lot more from her. And then finally, Jason Cass is an amazing young guy. He has his own agency down in Centralia, Illinois. It's an unusual agency. I won't go there now, but he's been in the business since, for about 11 years or so. His agency is JDC Insurance in Centralia, which is a small town in Illinois, near where I was brought up in Indiana. I just had to say that, Jason. You couldn't help that. At any rate, he's an insurance geek. He admits it. And digital insurance marketing is his thing. He was the Illinois Young Agent of the Year a few years ago. Last year, he just finished his term as chair of the National Young Agents Committee at the IIABA. And he's speaking around. He's an amazing young guy. And I really have enjoyed my work with him. So here we go then. Marit, will you take it from there and tell what we're going to be doing in this program?
Great. Thank you, George, for that introduction. So good morning, everyone. We are excited to present this workshop, and of course it's a three-part series. This is one of three over the next 3 weeks. And if you're following this along and you've received an email invite, there is a link there for a workbook, and the front page of that workbook is shown on the screen right now. This is an instructional workbook that you can use to follow along during the presentations. It will actually take you through all three workshops, and what we're hoping you'll do is you'll download it and follow along, take notes, and we think that this presentation is just scratching the surface of what you will be doing. We're going to be covering a lot of information, and we're hoping you'll take notes, include your teams, do activities after the workshop, because just hearing it isn't going to be as meaningful as actually doing the exercises with your management team or you and your cohorts at the office. If you're following this later on and did not include an email invite, please feel free to email me, and my email address will come later as well, but it's Marit, M-A-R-I-T, at iianm.org. Send me an email and I'll be happy to send you a free workshop that you can download and follow along through the next three workshops that we follow. So we are going to cover a lot of information over the next 3 sessions, and what we'd like to do is start off first about talking about your digital presence as a whole. And in order for you to go do something with it, it's important that you have a strategy in place. You understand how you want to market yourself, how you want to present your value proposition. And so this first session is really going to be talking about your strategy, your definition. How do you define yourself in the market? How do you define yourself as an independent agent versus a captive agent? And does it even matter to the consumer? So we're going to ask some tough questions. We're going to ask you to challenge yourself. And then in the second session, we'll talk more about how you then go do that. But if you don't have your language right, you don't have the words put together, you don't know how to articulate it and reach your consumer directly, what you do and make yourself present is not going to have much of an impact later on. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Marty and ask him to talk about the process we're going to go through in talking about branding, and we'll move clearly through the presentation at this point.
Great, thanks, Marit. So indeed, session 1 is called The Power of We and the Power of Me. When we say the power of we, what we're talking about is us as the independent agency channel. What makes us unique, and how are we different, and how do we compare ourselves and contrast ourselves with direct writers and captive agencies. We also talk about the power of me, because this is where you want to begin to show how your agency specifically differs from those in your local competitive area. So how do you really explain your value proposition and talk in the language of the consumer? How do we do that so that those insurance buyers that are out there, whether they're personal lines buyers or commercial lines buyers, actually understand who we are, what makes us unique, and why they need to select us as their consultant and provider of insurance services. I grabbed this slide from a McKinsey report, not the most recent McKinsey report, which is making a lot of splash in the industry saying how the independent channel is dead. This was an earlier report talking about just the whole how digital marketing is becoming the new wave and how insurance companies and agencies should begin the process. What I wanted to get off of this specific slide, though, is sort of the new buying process that's taking place in the mind of the consumer. And it's very easy for those of us who are in the industry to say, you know what, this really doesn't impact us because insurance is somehow different and people don't buy insurance on the internet. I grant you that people are not pushing the bind button in the majority of insurance shopping experiences. What I will say, however, is almost 80% of consumers now shop online for insurance. Think about your own behavior. Anytime you go out and shop, you probably start with the internet. So this process is designed to start right here in the consider phase. So we are now in the process of considering a purchase of insurance. And so we begin to do some basic fact finding. And now we go out and we come to the evaluate. So we're going to stay on this external circle initially. We start the evaluate process. So how do I determine exactly which products make sense to me, which insurance products might be there? And at this point, this is where your digital presence begins to come into play. So in addition to your website, it's also social media forums, okay? People that are making comments about your product. We ultimately make a purchase decision, and that drives our experience. How did my process go? Notice here that we have mobile apps help people service their product, right? So, and then as we begin to gain experience with the product, in this case insurance, and our agency, we actually will become an advocate potentially for the agency that is providing that service for us. And now what happens is, as this bond grows, we create this internal circle. So now when I want to I buy a new recreational toy, maybe I get a boat, now I'm thinking I'm going right back because my experiences with this agency are really great, okay? So all of these things out on the perimeter talk to how you should be out in the digital media working to build your brand. So these results, the pros and the cons, we're going to look at both the captive channel, and then I'm going to introduce Jason Cass, who's going to talk about the independent channel. But these pros and cons came out of a working session that George mentioned earlier that we did at the Big Eye of New Mexico a number of months ago. We had an opportunity to break a group of about 70 people up into 4 groups, and these are the results of what came out of that discussion. So what do we know about the captive channel? Well, first and foremost, obviously they're all over the airwaves. They do a marketing blitz like nobody else. Statistics from Advertising Age tell us that the top four, that'd be Geico, Progressive Direct, Allstate, and State Farm, spend $2.2 billion a year marketing. That's the total spend by all four of them. Okay, so they are everywhere, and what they are trying to tell you is, here are all of the things that we do very well, right? You know who we are. We're nationwide. We're everywhere. It's easy. Hey, cut that middleman out. Hey, make up your own price. Just go ahead and do that. Now, how many of you actually believe that if an insured goes out and makes up his own price, that they're going to be appropriately covered? Probably no one is, right? But the fact of the matter is, they're spreading this disinformation because they have a very large megaphone. Now let's talk about what they don't do. Obviously, they don't provide choice. If what you need doesn't fit the product that I have to sell you, tough luck. I'm going to sell you the product I have, right? Can they really be an advisor? Okay. Do I get personal contact? Particularly when we're talking about the directs with big cube farms, you are nothing more than just an entry in their digital system somewhere. And many times we know that customers have had bad experiences because if they have a claim and the company decides to stop writing them, they have nowhere else to go. They have to start the shopping experience all over. Obviously, those are all things that give us an opportunity, if we communicate our values appropriately, to turn those customers, to take those customers away. Now I want to introduce Jason Cass, who's going to talk about the pros and cons of the independent channel.
Hey, how are we doing out there? This is Jason Cass, and you know, when we were doing this study in Mexico, or in New Mexico, excuse me, I was really amazed by walking around and seeing all the agents who were all independent agents go through the pros and cons, because I think they really did a good job, but it also kind of stuck out. Maybe sometimes you out there listening and watching this don't realize all the pros and cons that we do have, but it's realistic, and you can see that sometimes the pros is more than the cons. But I think we're eliminating the cons with a lot of the stuff you're going to learn here in this presentation. Obviously, some of the pros we have, these are, once again, these are what the agents that were there said, that we have more choices and access to companies. I mean, that's just common sense. You can see down here, down the line, when it comes to experience, local, you can make local payments too. Kind of thought that was funny myself, but local being the #1 drive. And you'll realize when we talk here that the number one thing about you getting your digital and social presence on is it levels the playing field and makes the local agent actually the agent to buy from. And truly, from what all consumer reports have found out, that's what the consumer wants, is local. The personal relationship, the advocate. I think that the personal relationship is huge. Nothing nothing builds personal relationships better, yes, obviously, than one-on-one contact, but social media can build those personal relationships of a one-on-one contact in a broad, gigantic scale. So I think that was important. Counseling, more options. I believe that that's important. So much, not so much in educating the consumers. We're starting to realize that when people want to find a solution, they don't necessarily call the agent anymore. They go to Google and they put it in there. So when they come to us, they usually have most of the information they need. It's us as counselors to decipher that information and help them fit directly what needs to them. The point is, they're coming to you with the information. And staying active in the community. We all know no one's more active in the community than an independent insurance agent. Some of the cons that we have, and these are cons that we need to deal with, but it's true of who we are. Not available 24/7. I got to say that that is one that is very important. I have to say that I pride myself on being claimed as 24/7, and I've been doing this now for 4.5 years, or actually, sorry, 4 years with my own agency. Never had anybody call me at 3 in the morning. But it is easy to be 24/7. Maybe that's some things that we can tell you about a little bit later or in another presentation. Little branding recognition. Trusted choice is who we are, hoot, but we do a very bad job of individualing ourselves sometimes inside of a community. Low visibility. We do have fewer locations. That's not for everybody, but a lot of us are 1- and 2-man shops. And we don't have the IT that direct writers have. was surprised when I saw that because truthfully, I think we have more IT than the direct writers have because we're allowed to use different functions and different people to do certain things rather than they just have one IT that is driven by the corporate level. So that's a con, I think, in a lot of people, but really that's a positive in the fact that we don't have a big monstrous IT department that guides us. Have you talked to someone else? And lack of trust. I was kind of thrown back there. I don't know exactly what they were meaning on the cons as far as lack of trust, but I think people see State Farm or they see Allstate and they feel warm and cuddly, but they may not recognize what that local brand awareness. So that's what we saw as coming from the independent channel. So I'm going to turn this, I believe, back over to
Marit.
Marit. That's who it is.
Great. Good. Thank you both, Marty and Jason. So I'm sure what that does for many of you is just validate what you already know, and it's interesting to actually put people through an exercise and have them come up with those answers rather than being told, and obviously this kind of a forum doesn't allow for that. But I would encourage you to take that exercise and have your staff do it, because it's amazing what, as they internalize that process, what they come out is saying what the value proposition for you as independent is versus somebody down the street who's a captive. But at the end of the day, does the consumer actually differentiate? When they see an agency on the street or on Main Street in your town, are they going, ooh, that's an independent agent, or is that a captive? I don't think that they are, frankly. I think what they're looking for is that they trust an agency, and they trust an agent or the staff that they're working with. They're people that they can touch. And frankly, I'm not an insurance person, which might be scary that I'm on this call, but I think I can speak as a consumer when I say I want it to be easy. I think that when you're technically strong as a salesperson or an expert in your field, it's easy to think about what you're buying because you're technically astute. It's like if you went to Best Buy and you wanted to get technology now. It may not be easy for you to do because you're not a techie. So what you do is you go in and you say, hey, make it easy for me. I'm going to tell you what I want. Just give me the best answer. Don't give me 100 options. And I think when you become an expert, you often get stuck in the technical answers rather than making it easy. When I work with my agent, I simply trust them. They know who I am. They know what I want. And I trust they're giving me the coverage that I need. And I think that that's what consumers are looking for, as opposed to all the knowledge that can somewhat become overwhelming. So we have to get really good at making people trust us and seeing the overall benefit of who we are and take those pros and actually act on them and make that part of the life that you want them to experience with you. Because if they don't understand it at the end, they will actually default to price and convenience. And I think that that makes sense probably and resonates with you as a consumer. If you took the product out as insurance and made it something you didn't understand, that's usually what you do. So if we move to the next slide and we say lessons learned, so what do you do with that? Obviously what you want to do is market and respond to what the captive strengths are. So we have to remain price competitive. We can't throw that out. Granted, we can speak to why it would be important to maybe pay a little bit more and make sure you do get the coverage, because I think Marty mentioned earlier, sure, they'll say, I just want that, but if they name their own price, they're not going to get what they want. But we also need to be convenient, and when our captive and our direct writers are available 24/7, how do we respond to that? How do we use technology to be available to our prospects and to our customers on a regular, easily received basis? So please think about that for your agency. And then we've got a ton of strengths. Obviously, Jason went through them. The list is very long. It's going to be important to think about that and say, how do we use our strengths? Who can you align yourself with and make yourself be known as a we? Are you part of associations? Are you part of any aggregators? Are you part of carriers? How do you make yourself not just the one agency on the street and rather be seen as a we, because it helps us all in the long run? Much rather have people picking an independent agent and we're competing against each other than be competing against the direct writers and captives. Also, you want to play on that part that you're a counselor. At the end of the day, what are consumers buying? They're buying you. And that's what that expertise and advocate, you're their advocate. And I think that if you can message that correctly, consumers will think, you know what, I'm not buying into some big company that's looking out for themselves. I am working with somebody who's going to advocate on my behalf and make sure that I'm covered. And when claims occur, I know I've got somebody there on my side to walk me through that abyss that George talked about earlier. So absolutely important to do that. And of course we want to make sure that they understand they have choices. They have carrier choices, they have coverage choices, and it's not just a one choice, one selection, one price that they can't maneuver through. So in order to do that, we're going to be talking about how you brand yourself. And I'll tell you what, I just did a strategic planning workshop with an agency here in New Mexico last week. This isn't easy. And what I talk about, and if you're following in your workbook, you want to switch to page 3 in the workbook so you can take some notes along the way. But this is an exercise I highly recommend you do with your staff. Because you know what, at the end of the day, they know who you are, and they are who you are, and they're presenting themselves. And if you walk in, and many of you might have gone through the exercise of what's our vision and our values and what personality, and very often times we make the mistake and tell our staff who we are instead of having them be part of the exercise. And it's interesting to me how often principals and agents are pleasantly surprised when they ask their staff these questions and they come up with exactly the same answers that they would, and they're going through the exercise together. So take it to a staff meeting, ask them these questions. Who do we want to be? What do we want for our agency? Where do we want to go? How will we arrive there? What is our mission? What are we trying to do in regards to that? And then talk about your values. And so I think what we want to talk about is, what do we stand for? And what we did was we took a bunch of values here and threw them out there, and this is what everybody says, right? I'm professional, we're knowledgeable, we're creative, we've got expertise, we've got integrity. What I ask is, what is the behavior that you're looking for inside your agency that tells people who you really are? We're inventive. That's not necessarily creative, right? We're responsive. What are the words you're going to use for your agency that is different? Because all the ones on the left there, and maybe even some on the right, are words that every one of your competitors is going to use. Figure out the words that make you personal, make people connect with you, make people trust you, and it's okay to have fun with it. I think sometimes we get so, I saw a presentation a couple weeks ago where somebody said, we're so interested in being professional that we forget that we're humans and people want to reach us as us. And so be approachable and be able to do that. And so with our core competencies, ask yourselves, what do we do best? And I think I skipped a slide, so I'm going to go back for just a second. So as our mission, it's not a map. It's a touch point. Focus on the destination. Ask ourselves, what do we want to accomplish? What are we here for? One of the questions that I like to ask is from a standpoint of when you're talking to your staff and you say, what are we best at? You know, and get them to be personal. It's not just about some generic thing that your agency does. But it may be interesting that you find yourself, and if you look on page 3 of your workbook, when my customers think of me, what do they think of? Ask your staff that question, each one of them, what do they think of? And does that actually respond to what their needs are? So take the time. Don't just make this an exercise. Just don't hand off the answers to your staff. Make it part of your language and your conversation and your promise, because then your staff will be talking about it, they'll make it real, and they'll actually consider the benefits and be able to speak to that to your customer base. So positioning your agency in front of your customer's mind is going to be an important part of that, and I'm going to ask Marty to take it from here and speak through a couple exercises, and starting on page 4 on your workbook is where he's going to talk about detailing and talking about profiles. And I will say, this is not easy. It's a lot of hard work, but when you get it right, it makes a big difference. Go ahead, Marty.
Thanks, Marit. I'm going to echo what Marit just told us. This is not easy, but it's critical that you do it, because this is how, once you've defined these things that we're talking about, and this is hard work, it gives you the foundation for all of the digital marketing components that we're going to talk about. And this is a great time of the year to be thinking about this. This is we're moving into the fourth quarter. It's time we're all beginning to think about 2014. So that's why we're here. If you do the hard work here, you can kick off 2014 with a new initiative to really maximize your digital marketing. That's what we'll be talking about, those actual digital components in parts 2 and 3. So how do we position our agency in the mind of the consumer? We've now kind of gone through that branding exercise. We've begun to understand what makes us different, right? But now we need to do some hard work and talk about who is our customer. And one of the big mistakes that many agencies make is they say, we write everything, anybody who walks in the door we can handle. Well, that's a very difficult, that makes this exercise extremely difficult, because you don't have an avatar, okay? Some of you may have seen this movie. I put this picture up here just so that we kind of understand. Jake, the gentleman on the right, actually controlled a synthetic being that went to the planet of the woman on the left, and he was, to their eyes, their species, so they accepted him far better. So the whole idea of an avatar, fancy word, but it's creating a picture of who that ideal customer is. When Jason and I talked about this earlier, Jason was a little bit confused, because it's hard to say, well, what's my average customer look like, right? Who are they? This is where, if your average customer is everybody, it's almost impossible to do. So what Jason and I did, we talked about one of his primary niches, which is railroad contractors. As soon as we started talking about railroad contractors, suddenly Jason got it. He said, oh, I know exactly who these guys are. They build railroads in their backyard. They like to be out fishing. They're all talking about how they're going to retire to the South. Now all of a sudden he's got a picture of who that consumer is. So you will need to do this for those niches, those customers you have. Now, if we want to go even as big as personal lines, okay, so who's our typical personal lines customer? Some agencies make no bones about the fact that their typical customer is a non-standard auto risk. Okay, that's great. If that's who that is, and that's who your typical customer is, great. Now that gives you an image of what your marketing can start to look like, right? You're going to be targeted at a group of people that is completely different than if your typical and preferred customer would be a young family with multiple kids, 2 dogs, and a minivan. All of a sudden now, the images that you're going to be using and the words that you will put on all of your digital marketing will change based upon who those 2 customers are. So begin to create a model for who that customer looks like. And one of the things that you can do, this is in your workbook, okay, find out what that target niche is, and then talk about the fears and frustrations of that avatar in that niche. What are their wants and aspirations? Psychology tells us that we are 2/3 more likely to move away from fears and frustrations than we are to move towards wants and aspirations. So let's talk insurance very generically for a minute. What are the fears and frustrations? You're going to have a claim that's not covered. What are your wants and aspirations? You want to sleep quietly at night knowing that your needs have been taken care of, right? Or if it's life insurance that you want to, at some point, make sure that you leave your family well taken care of. So your typical marketing message, after you've identified very specific fears and frustrations for your target niche and wants and aspirations for your target niche, you want to create your messaging that emphasizes those things and talks about how your products make sure that there aren't uncovered claims, right? You're a specialist in this line of business, and so therefore fear and frustration for that railroad contractor, Jason's customer, is that he's going to get to a job site and not have the appropriate certificates there. So Jason's going to talk about how that's a problem for people that he's encountered in the past, and he solves that problem by having 24-hour certificate availability, and all of a sudden now his messaging is you no longer need to be concerned that you're going to show up on a job site and be unable to work. Your crew's going to be there. You're going to be paying them, but you can't get paid because you haven't taken care of the certification process, right? So there we have a way to talk about that. Okay, and finally now you need to begin to talk about your products. Too often as experts, and you know, I'm an insurance geek like many of you on here, we can talk forever about the features of our policy. We've got extended period of indemnity, or we've got, you know, money in securities has been raised, or backup of sewers and drains, you know, and we talk about feature, feature, feature. But this is a new way that I want you to think about how to do this. Talk about your features, but then describe the advantage that that does, and ultimately what the benefit to the customer is. So let's talk about a feature. This policy includes, and I can't think of the name, so having a brain failure. I'll go to what do we call business interruption? Thank you. This policy has business interruption. That's the feature. Well, what's the advantage of that? Well, what business interruption coverage does is it continues your revenue stream when your business has been shut down by a covered loss. What is the benefit of that? Well, Mr. Customer, what that means to you is that during a loss, when you're shut down and you're unable to generate any revenue for your business, we understand that your expenses continue. You've got a mortgage payment you've got to make. You've got staff that you want to continue to pay because they're all experienced, and you don't want to open in 6 months and have to hire somebody who knows nothing about your business. Loss of income coverage covers your business so that you can continue with your ongoing expenses, and you can keep your staff paid even though they're not working, so that when we're ready to open, you can start back in business immediately where you were previous to the loss. Do you see how that worked? We talked about the feature, loss of income, what's the advantage, how does that help you, and ultimately what the benefit is. And when you string those together, it provides what the customer's really coming to you for. They want security. They want your expertise. But you've got to turn that into a thing that works for them. Jason, why don't you, since we're at the end of our time here, why don't you tell the listeners where we're going to be on our next session?
All right, fantastic. Thanks, Marty and Marit. You guys did a fantastic job trying to put together who that person is, how we can connect to them, what is our value proposition as an agent, becoming an avatar, which I think is a great analogy, Marty. But now, I mean, sometimes that gets a little deep, gets a little mundane, gets a little boring, even though it is vital to understanding that before we go further. But now it is time to go further. And what we're going to be talking about next week is we're going to be talking about, first of all, a real professional website. What does that look like? What does it entail? As you probably are aware of, and maybe you haven't thought of this and now you will, if you're not online and you don't have a website, to the consumer, you're not a real business. I mean, really think about that. Look how far we have come just in the last 3, 5 to 10 years to be able to say that. It used to be if you didn't have a location, you weren't a real place. Now, today, location is not as important. Website is essential and has to have that. So we're going to talk about that. What does that look like? What's going to help you have that kind of presence that you need to have? We're also going to talk about being found on search engines. It's really important. Once again, content, they say, is king, but if no one sees the king or no one hears the king, he's obviously not king. So you've got to be able to have your website found so that then people will be able to find you. That's very, very important in what we're doing. And then we'll also be talking about getting engaged and how we can use social networking in defining who we are as an agent, forming our avatar, bringing it together with who our website is, where we can be found, and how we can interact. So please join us next week. It's going to be a fantastic time. George, thanks for allowing us to have the time to do this. And to all the listeners, we'll talk to you next week.
Well, it's been a real pleasure to have you guys. I just can't believe so much covered in such a short period of time, but it was just beautiful. I was on that meeting where you had all the people broke it up, and we came out with the pros and cons. I really loved that, and I learned a lot from you, all of you. Anyway, here's the way you can contact them. You always come back to this one. There's Jason on the left. There's Marty and, of course, Project CAP on the right. And don't forget that you can go to Marit Peters. Her website is her email address is MARIT@IIANM. That's Independent Insurance Agents of New Mexico.org, not .com, .org. Notice that, and then you can go to right now if you want, and you don't happen to have the workbook we've been talking about called Planning Your Digital Presence. For goodness sakes, just go to Mark and she'll send you one or send you the link to it. That's what she'll do immediately. You guys are really something, and I'm amazed, and I can't wait for the next one to see next week. But in the meantime, don't forget to go back to the quiz flash, which is on the left hand. It was on your email address. That's the Insurance Community Center quiz flash every week. 5 questions on a different product every week, and it's really fascinating. And also, of course, you're going to have the of the month, the tip of the week, I should say, not the month. The tip of the week. You can click on that, and that's always very interesting. That comes from agentsonline.org, and then you can click on the rough notes thing there anytime you want, and you'll have the full archive of all of these great interviews. My suggestion to you, one more time, is to, after you finish this, get your members of your agency to listen to every bit of it. This should be required listening and reading 101. Having said that, I'll see you guys all next week.